Marcus Thompson walked through the palace gates with a swagger in his step. At 25 years old, he was one of the youngest people ever to earn a third-degree black belt in Taekwondo. His muscular frame and confident posture made it clear that he was someone who took his physical abilities very seriously. Marcus had been invited to the palace to give a special demonstration for the royal family's charity event. The event was raising money for underprivileged children, and several martial arts experts had volunteered their time to perform. Marcus saw this as his big chance to gain recognition and maybe even attract wealthy sponsors for his martial arts. The palace courtyard was set up with a large mat area surrounded by elegant chairs for the guests. Crystal chandeliers had been moved outside for the evening event, and white roses decorated every table. About 200 people were expected to attend, including business leaders, celebrities, and members of the royal family. The demonstration will begin in 30 minutes, announced a palace coordinator. All performers, please check your equipment and prepare for your presentations. Marcus stretched his legs and practiced a few high kicks. He had planned an impressive routine that would showcase his speed, power, and flexibility. He wanted everyone to see why he was considered one of the most promising young martial artists in the country. Standing near the entrance to the performance area was Sergeant David Williams, a royal guard who had served the palace for 8 years. At 32 years old, David was known for his calm demeanor and professional attitude. He wore the traditional red uniform of the Queen's Guard, complete with the famous tall black hat. David's job was to maintain security during the event while staying as invisible as possible. He had worked many similar functions and knew how to blend into the background while keeping his eyes alert for any potential problems. Marcus noticed David standing quietly by the entrance. The guard's stillness annoyed him somehow. Marcus was used to being the center of attention at martial arts events, and something about David's calm presence made him feel the need to assert his dominance. "Hey, guard," Marcus called out loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "You look pretty stiff standing there. Ever done any real physical training?" David turned his head slightly and made polite eye contact. "I've had some training, sir." "Are you enjoying the evening?" "Some training?" Marcus laughed. "I've got a third-degree black belt, and I've been training since I was 8 years old. I bet I could teach you a thing or two about real combat." Several guests turned to listen to the conversation. David maintained his professional composure, but Marcus seemed to interpret the guard's politeness as weakness. "I'm sure you're very skilled, sir," David replied respectfully. "I hope you have a successful demonstration tonight." Marcus stepped closer to David, invading his personal space. "You know what your problem is? Your royal guards think you're tough because of those fancy uniforms and ceremonies, but you've never been in a real fight." David's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained professional. "Sir, I need to ask you to maintain appropriate distance. I'm working security for this event." "Security," Marcus scoffed. "What are you going to do, stand at attention until someone gets bored and leaves?" A small crowd of guests had gathered to watch the exchange. Marcus seemed to feed off their attention, becoming more aggressive with each comment. "Look at you," Marcus continued. "Standing there like a statue, bet you couldn't defend yourself. If your life depended on it, all show, no substance." David's eyes hardened, but his voice remained steady. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to step back and prepare for your demonstration. This conversation is becoming inappropriate." Marcus felt challenged by David's calm authority. In his martial arts world, respect was earned through displays of physical dominance. He couldn't understand how this quiet guard could maintain such composure while being insulted. Inappropriate? Marcus raised his voice. "You want to see inappropriate? Let me show you what real training looks like." The crowd around them grew larger. Some guests looked uncomfortable, while others seemed curious about what would happen next. The palace coordinator noticed the commotion and started walking over, but she was too far away to intervene quickly. Marcus bounced on his toes like a boxer, warming up his muscles. "Come on, guard, show me what you've got. Let's see if all that ceremony training taught you anything useful." David stood perfectly still, but his mind was racing. He had dealt with provocative individuals before, but never at such a high-profile event with so many witnesses. He knew that any reaction could create a diplomatic incident or embarrass the royal family. Sir, I'm not going to engage in any kind. A physical confrontation? Please return to your preparation area, scared. Marcus taunted. I thought so. All that fancy uniform is just for show. What Marcus didn't know was that David had served 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan before joining the Royal Guard. He had real combat experience and advanced training in multiple forms of hand-to-hand combat. But he also had discipline and understood the consequences of losing control. Marcus made the decision that would change both of their lives forever. Took a step back, raised his leg, and delivered a powerful side kick directly into David's ribs. The sound of the impact echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot. The kick landed with tremendous force. David doubled over slightly, pain shooting through his left side. The crowd gasped in shock and horror. Several women screamed. Men stepped back instinctively, not wanting to get caught in whatever was about to happen next. Marcus stood with his legs still extended, a satisfied smirk on his face. He had expected the guard to crumple to the ground, or at least cry out in pain. Instead, David slowly straightened up, his face pale but his expression controlled. There, Marcus announced loudly to the crowd, that's what happens when ceremony meets reality. Your precious guard couldn't even see that kick coming. The guests stared in stunned silence, which many of them were thinking the same thing. This young martial artist had just assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard in front of hundreds of witnesses at a royal charity event. David touched his ribs where the kick had landed. The pain was intense, and he suspected Marcus might have cracked one of his ribs. But years of military training had taught him to function through pain and to think clearly under pressure. Sir, David said quietly, his voice steady despite the pain. You just committed assault on a royal guard in front of multiple witnesses. I need you to remain where you are while I call for backup. Marcus laughed harshly. Assault. That was barely a demonstration. If I really wanted to hurt you, you'd be on the ground right now. You did hurt me, David replied matter-of-factly. And you've broken several laws in the process. The palace coordinator finally reached them, her face white with shock. On earth is happening here? This guard insulted my skills, Marcus said before David could speak. I was just showing him what real training looks like. No harm done. David looked at the coordinator. Ma'am, this gentleman just kicked me in the ribs with significant force. I believe I may have a cracked rib, and I need to file an incident. Report immediately. No harm done? The coordinator repeated, staring at Marcus in disbelief. You attacked a royal guard at a charity event? Marcus seemed to realize for the first time that his actions might have serious consequences. The crowd's expressions had shifted from curiosity to disgust and anger. People were whispering and pointing at him. Look, it was just a little demonstration, Marcus said, his confidence beginning to waver. Guards are supposed to be tough, right? I was just testing him. An elderly gentleman in an expensive suit called out from the crowd. Oh, yeah. Man, you just committed a crime in front of all of us. David reached for his radio to call for backup, but the movement caused a sharp pain in his ribs that made him wince visibly. The crowd noticed his discomfort, and their anger toward Marcus intensified. You're really hurt, observed a woman in an elegant evening gown. Someone call a doctor? Marcus began to panic as he saw the situation spiraling out of control. This was supposed to be his big break, his chance to impress wealthy sponsors and gain recognition. Instead, he was facing the possibility of arrest and criminal charges.
Wait, Marcus said desperately. Let's not make this bigger than...
It needs to be. I'll apologize. We can work this out. David studied Marcus's face carefully. The young man's arrogance had been replaced by fear and desperation. David could see that Marcus was beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had done, Sir David said slowly. An apology doesn't heal broken ribs or erase criminal behavior. Please, Marcus pleaded. I made a mistake. I got carried away. My whole career could be ruined over this. The crowd watched this exchange with fascination. The cocky martial artist who had been taunting the guard moments earlier was now begging for mercy. David felt another sharp pain in his ribs and had to steady himself against a nearby table. The injury was definitely serious, and he needed medical attention. but something about Marcus's desperation made him pause. "Marcus Thompson," David said, having heard the coordinator use the young man's name earlier. "Why did you kick me?" Marcus looked confused by the question. I wanted to show you that I was stronger than you, now that you've done that. How do you feel?" The unexpected question caught Marcus off guard. He looked around at the hostile faces in the crowd, then back at David's pained but calm expression. "I feel terrible," Marcus admitted quietly. "I feel like an idiot." David nodded slowly. "That's a start. But Marcus, do you understand why what you did was wrong? Not just illegal, but morally wrong." Marcus struggled to find words. He had spent his entire adult life in martial arts environments where physical dominance was respected and celebrated. He had never really considered the ethics of using his skills against someone who wasn't fighting back. "What?" David said next with surprise. Not only Marcus, but everyone who witnessed it. David looked directly into Marcus's eyes, his voice calm despite the pain in his ribs. "Marcus, I want you to understand something. I'm not angry at you." The crowd murmured in surprise. Marcus's face showed complete confusion. "You're not angry?" Marcus asked hesitantly. "No, I'm not. I'm disappointed and I'm in pain, but I'm not angry." The palace coordinator looked shocked. "Sergeant Williams, this man assaulted you. Of course you should be angry." David held up his hand gently. "With respect, anger won't heal my ribs or teach this young man anything valuable." Marcus stared at David in bewilderment. This was not the reaction he had expected or experienced in similar situations before. Usually when he fought people, they either fought back aggressively or backed down in fear. David's calm response was something entirely new. "I don't understand," Marcus said. "Why aren't you angry? I hurt you." David winced as another wave of pain hit his ribs, but he continued speaking steadily. "Marcus, may I ask you something?" Sure. "Many people. Have you fought in your martial arts career?" Marcus thought for a moment. "In competitions? Maybe 50 or 60 opponents over the years? And how many of those fights taught you something about being a better person?" The question caught Marcus completely off guard. He had never thought about martial arts in those terms before. "I'm not sure what you mean," Marcus admitted. "Marcus, you kicked me because you wanted to prove you were stronger and more skilled than me. And you were right. Your kick was powerful and well executed. You're clearly a talented martial artist." The crowd listened with fascination as David continued. "But what did proving that accomplish? Did it make you a better person? Did it help anyone? Did it solve any problems in the world?" Marcus felt increasingly uncomfortable under David's gentle questioning. He had spent years focusing on physical techniques and winning competitions, but he had never considered these deeper questions. I guess it didn't accomplish anything positive," Marcus said slowly. "That's right. In fact, it made several things worse. You hurt me, you ruined a charity event for children, you frightened the guests, and you put your own future at risk." A woman in the crowd called out, "Why are you being so kind to him? He attacked you." David turned slightly toward the woman, moving carefully to avoid aggravating his injury. "Ma'am, because being cruel to him won't accomplish anything positive either." Turned back to Marcus. "Marcus, I want to tell you something about real strength." "What do you mean?" David took a careful breath, managing the pain. "Real strength isn't about how hard you can kick or how many people you can defeat in a fight. Real strength is about self-control, especially when you have the power to hurt someone." Marcus found himself listening intently, despite his embarrassment and fear. "When you kicked me, you showed physical power, but no self-control. When I choose not to retaliate against you, even though I have the training to do so, I'm showing a different kind of strength." "You have training?" Marcus asked, suddenly curious. "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining the Royal Guard. I've had extensive combat training in multiple disciplines. But more importantly, I've learned when not to use that training." The revelation hit Marcus like another kick to the ribs. This quiet, professional guard was probably far more dangerous than Marcus had realized, yet he had chosen restraint over retaliation. "So you could have fought back?" Marcus asked quietly. "Physically? Yes. But what would that have accomplished? We would have had a brawl at a charity event, possibly injuring innocent bystanders. I would have violated my oath as a royal guard. And you still wouldn't have learned anything except that violence leads to more violence. Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions washing over him. Shame for his actions, respect for David's restraint, and confusion about everything he had believed about strength in conflict. "Sergeant Williams," the palace coordinator interjected, "we still need to call medical services and file incident." "Reports, of course," David agreed. "But before we do that, I want to ask Marcus one more question." David looked at the young martial artist with something that looked almost like compassion. "Marcus, if I gave you a chance to make this right, not to avoid consequences, but to turn this into something positive, would you be interested?" Marcus nodded eagerly, though he had no idea what David might propose. What David suggested next would surprise everyone present and change the course of both men's lives. David looked around at the crowd of guests who were hanging on every word of their conversation. Despite his pain, he could see an opportunity to turn this disaster into something meaningful. "Marcus," David said carefully, "I want to propose something unusual. Instead of just pressing charges and walking away from each other, what if we use this incident as a learning opportunity?" Marcus looked hopeful but confused. "What kind of learning opportunity?" "The charity event tonight is raising money for underprivileged children, many of whom deal with bullying and violence in their daily lives. What if you and I work together to create a program that teaches young people about real strength and conflict resolution?" The crowd exchanged surprised glances. The palace coordinator looked skeptical. "Sergeant Williams," she said, "are you certain about this? Has this man injured you?" "He did injure me, and there will still need to be consequences for that." "But ma'am, punishment without education just creates resentment. Education without consequences teaches nothing." "I think we can do both." Marcus felt a spark of hope mixed with genuine curiosity. What would this program involve? David shifted his weight, trying to find a position that didn't aggravate his ribs. "Marcus, you have impressive physical skills and obvious passion for martial arts. But tonight, you showed that you don't understand the responsibility that comes with those abilities." "I'm starting to realize that," Marcus admitted. "What if we created workshops for at-risk youth? You could teach them physical techniques, and I could teach them about discipline, respect, and when not to fight. Together, we could show them what it means to be truly strong." An elderly gentleman in the crowd stepped forward. "Excuse me, Sergeant. I'm Lord Harrison, and I'm on the board of several youth charities, so this idea has merit. But surely, there need to be conditions." David nodded respectfully. "Absolutely, Lord Harrison." Marcus would need to complete community service hours, take classes in conflict resolution, and demonstrate genuine change in his attitude and behavior. Marcus looked around at the faces watching him. For the first time that evening, some of them didn't look hostile. Few people seemed genuinely interested in David's proposal. "What happened to my criminal charges?" Marcus asked nervously. "They would still be filed," David said firmly. "Actions have consequences. But if you successfully completed the program and showed genuine growth, I would speak to the prosecutor about reduced penalties." Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes. This man he had attacked was offering him not just mercy, but a chance to redeem himself. "Why?" Marcus asked quietly. "Why would you do this for me after what I did?" David was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "Marcus, when I was in Afghanistan, I saw what happens when people solve problems with violence. I saw communities destroyed by cycles of retaliation and revenge. I saw young men like you, who had strength and passion, but no wisdom about how to use them." The crowd listened intently to David's words. Some of those young men learned to channel their abilities into protecting others instead of hurting them. They became heroes. Others never learned, and they became casualties or causes of more violence. Marcus wiped his eyes, no longer caring that hundreds of people were watching him cry. "You see potential in me?" Marcus asked, hopefully. "I see someone who made a terrible mistake, but who seems capable of learning from it. Whether you fulfill that potential is up to you." Lord Harrison stepped closer to both men. "Gentlemen, if you're serious about this proposal, I'd like to offer funding and organizational support. Our foundation works with several schools and community centers that could benefit from such a program. The palace coordinator looked thoughtful. Sergeant Williams, if the royal family approved this program, it could become an official palace charity initiative. David smiled despite his pain. That would be an honor, ma'am. Marcus looked overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of his situation. I don't deserve this chance, he said quietly. You're right, David replied honestly. You don't deserve it. But the children who might benefit from our program do deserve it. This isn't about what you deserve, Marcus. It's about what you can contribute to make up for what you did wrong. Woman in the crowd called out, What guarantee do we have that he won't just do this again to someone else? It was a fair question, and David considered it seriously. There's no guarantee, David admitted. But ma'am, there's also no guarantee that punishment alone will prevent him from repeating his mistakes. At least this way, if he does change, other people benefit from that change. Marcus straightened his shoulders and looked directly at the woman who had asked the question. Ma'am, I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I can promise that I'll work every day to become someone worthy of Sergeant Williams' faith in me. And if I fail, then I deserve whatever consequences come from that failure. Lord Harrison smiled approvingly. It's the first truly mature thing you've said all evening, young man. The medical team arrived just then, having been called during the earlier commotion. As they began examining David's ribs, he continued talking to Marcus. The program won't start immediately. First, you need to face the legal consequences of tonight. Then you need to prove through your actions that you're serious about change. How do I do that? Marcus asked. David winced as the medic palpated his injured ribs. Start by apologizing to every person here tonight. Not because you have to, but because you understand why what you did was wrong. What happened next would cement the transformation that had begun with one terrible kick. Marcus looked around at the crowd of elegantly dressed guests who had witnessed his shameful behavior. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the center of the group so everyone could see and hear him clearly. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice shaking slightly, I owe all of you an apology. You came here tonight to support a wonderful charity for children. And instead, you witnessed me assault a good man who was simply doing his job. The crowd listened in complete silence. David continued to work with the medic, but he was clearly paying attention to Marcus's words. I attacked Sergeant Williams because I was insecure about my own abilities, and I wanted to prove I was superior to him. That was wrong on every level. Marcus paused, gathering his courage to continue. I used skills that took years to develop to hurt someone who had never done anything to harm me. An elderly woman in a pearl necklace nodded approvingly. That takes courage to admit, young man? Marcuse turned toward her gratefully. Thank you, ma'am. But courage would have been walking away from this situation instead of creating it. He looked back at David, who was now having his ribs bandaged by the medical team. Sergeant Williams, I am deeply sorry for hurting you. You've showed me more patience and wisdom in 30 minutes than I've learned in years of martial arts training. David looked up from the medic's work. Marcus, I appreciate your apology. But the real test isn't what you say tonight. It's what you do in the months ahead. I understand, Marcus replied. And I want everyone here to know that I'm committed to proving that Sergeant Williams' faith in me isn't misplaced. Lord Harrison stepped forward again. Mr. Thompson, if you're serious about this commitment, I'd like to discuss some specific requirements for the program Sergeant Williams proposed. I'm listening, sir. First, you'll need to complete 100 hours of community service at local schools, teaching children about anti-bullying and conflict resolution. Second, you'll attend weekly counseling sessions to address the underlying attitudes that led to tonight's behavior. Marcus nodded seriously. I agree to both of those requirements. Third, Lord Harrison continued, you'll write a detailed curriculum for the youth program, incorporating both physical training and character development. This curriculum will be reviewed by child psychologists and education experts. And fourth, David added from his position with the medical team, you'll undergo the same basic training that Royal Guards receive in de-escalation and conflict management. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the scope of what was being proposed, but also excited by the opportunity to transform his mistake into something positive. How long would all of this take? Marcus asked. At least 6 months, Lord Harrison replied. And only if you demonstrate consistent progress and genuine attitude. Change throughout that period. The palace coordinator approached the group. Gentlemen, I've just spoken with Her Majesty's private secretary. The Queen has been informed of tonight's incident and the proposed resolution. She's impressed by Sergeant Williams' approach and has given preliminary approval for the program to proceed as a royal charity initiative. The crowd murmured with approval and excitement. David smiled despite his pain. However, the coordinator continued, Her Majesty wants to meet personally with both of you before giving final approval. She wants to assess Mr. Thompson's sincerity and commitment firsthand. Marcus felt his knees go weak. The Queen wants to meet with me? After what I did? The Queen is very wise about human nature, the coordinator explained. People should be judged not just by their worst moments, but by how they respond to those moments. David was helped to his feet by the medics, who confirmed that he had 2 cracked ribs, but no serious internal injuries. He would need several weeks of limited activity to heal properly. Marcus, David said as he prepared to leave for further medical evaluation. I want you to think about something while I'm recovering. What's that? Tonight you learned that physical power without wisdom can cause great harm. But you also learned that admitting mistakes and committing to change can create opportunities for great good. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I think I'm beginning to understand the difference. The difference between what? The difference between being strong and being truly powerful. You're truly powerful because you have the strength to choose mercy over revenge and to turn a bad situation into a chance to help others. David smiled. Now you're thinking like someone who could make a real difference in young people's lives. The medical team prepared to transport David to the hospital for x-rays and further treatment. He turned back to Marcus one final time. Marcus, the hardest part of this journey won't be the community service or the training. It will be staying humble and committed even when people praise you for changing. Success can be just as dangerous as failure if it goes to your head. Marcus looked around at the crowd, many of whom were now looking at him with hope rather than disgust. He could see how easy it would be to become proud of his transformation and forget the humility he was learning. How do I stay humble? Marcus asked. David pointed to his bandaged ribs. Remember this moment? Remember how it felt to realize you had hurt someone for no good reason? And remember that real strength always comes from serving others, not from dominating them. As David was helped into the ambulance, Marcus stood alone in the courtyard, surrounded by people who were giving him a second chance he didn't deserve. The weight of their trust felt heavier than any physical challenge he had ever faced, but for the first time in his life, he felt truly motivated to become worthy of that trust. 8 months later, Marcus stood in the same palace courtyard where he had committed the worst mistake of his life. But this time, he wore a simple instructor's uniform and carried a folder full of lesson plans for the Royal Guard Youth Leadership program he and David had developed together. The past 8 months had been the most challenging and rewarding of Marcus's life. The community service hours at local schools had opened his eyes to the daily struggles faced by at-risk youth. Many of the children he worked with came from broken homes, dealt with bullying, or lived in neighborhoods where violence was common. His weekly counseling sessions had forced him to confront the deep insecurities and need for validation that had driven his aggressive behavior. He learned that his constant need to prove his physical superiority came from a childhood. A feeling powerless and overlooked, the conflict resolution training with David had been particularly humbling. David, despite his cracked ribs and the pain Marcus had caused him, had spent hours teaching Marcus about de-escalation techniques, emotional intelligence, and the psychology of violence prevention. "Are you ready for today's demonstration?" David asked, approaching Marcus in the courtyard. David still moved carefully, as his ribs had taken longer to heal than expected, but his smile was warm and genuine. "As ready as I can be," Marcus replied. "I still can't believe the Queen agreed to attend. She's curious to see what we've built from the wreckage of that night 8 months ago." Today's event was the official launch of their youth program. 50 at-risk teenagers from local schools would participate in the first workshop, with Queen Elizabeth herself observing to determine whether the program would receive permanent royal patronage. The teenagers began arriving, many of them looking skeptical and defensive. Marcus recognized that attitude. It was the same one he had carried for most of his life. The need to appear tough and unimpressed by everything. Mr. Thompson called out a 15-year-old girl named Ashley. "My teacher said you used to beat people up for fun. Is that true?" Marcus had learned to expect questions like this. Early in his community service, he had tried to hide his past mistakes. David had taught him that honesty was more powerful than image management. "Ashley, I never beat people up for fun, but I did hurt people to make myself feel important. And 8 months ago, I hurt Sergeant Williams very badly because I was insecure and wanted to prove I was better than him." The teenagers looked interested. Adults usually tried to present themselves as perfect role models. Marcus's honesty was refreshing. "What happened after you hit him?" asked a 16-year-old boy named Tyler. "He could have fought back and probably won, but instead he chose to help me learn from my mistake. He taught me that real strength comes from helping people, not hurting them." David stepped forward. "Marcus taught me something too. He showed me that people can change if they're given the right opportunity and support." Queen Elizabeth arrived just then, accompanied by her security, detail, and palace staff. The teenagers immediately became more attentive, awed by the presence of royalty. "Your Majesty," David and Marcus said in unison, bowing respectfully. "Gentlemen," the Queen said with a slight smile, "I'm here to see this program that grew from such an unusual beginning. Please, proceed as you normally would." Marcus addressed the group of teenagers. "Today we're going to learn about a different kind of martial arts. It's not the kind that's about defeating opponents, but the kind that's about overcoming your own worst impulses." He gestured to David. "Sergeant Williams is going to teach you about something called tactical breathing, a technique that helps you stay calm and make good decisions when you're angry or scared." For the next hour, Marcus and David led the teenagers through exercises that combined physical training with lessons about emotional self-control, conflict resolution, and leadership. The Queen watched intently, occasionally asking questions and taking notes. The turning point came when Tyler, a boy with an obvious anger problem, started arguing with another participant. In the old days, Marcus would have used intimidation to shut down the conflict. Instead, he and David used the incident as a teaching opportunity. "Tyler," Marcus said calmly, "I can see you're frustrated. Can you tell us what's bothering you?"
"This
is stupid," Tyler snapped. "All this talk about controlling anger doesn't work when someone disrespects you." Marcus nodded understandingly. "You're right that anger is a natural response to disrespect, but Tyler, can I ask you something?
Ow.
When you get angry and react with violence, does it actually get you the respect you want?" Tyler thought for a moment. "Usually it just gets me in trouble." "Exactly. Now watch this." Marcus turned to David. "Sergeant Williams, would you mind demonstrating what happened the night we met?" David looked surprised, but nodded. In slow motion, Marcus recreated the kick that had started their entire journey, stopping just short of contact. 8 months ago, I kicked Sergeant Williams because I felt disrespected by his calmness. I thought hurting him would make me feel better and make everyone respect me more. The teenagers watched intently, but what actually happened was that everyone lost respect for me. I nearly destroyed my career, and I hurt a good man who had done nothing wrong. Tyler looked thoughtful. "So fighting back when you feel disrespected usually makes things worse." David stepped in. "Tyler, the strongest thing I did that night wasn't fighting back. It was choosing to help Marcus learn from his mistake instead of just punishing him for it." Queen Elizabeth approached the group. "Mr. Thompson, may I ask you something?" Marcus felt nervous, but stood up straight. "Of course, Your Majesty. Do you believe you've truly changed, or are you simply managing your behavior better?" It was a profound question that cut to the heart of everything Marcus had been working on. He took a moment to consider his answer carefully. "Your Majesty, I think I'm still changing every day. 8 months ago, I thought strength was about proving I was better than other people. Now I think strength is about helping other people become better versions of themselves." The Queen nodded approvingly. "And what have you learned about forgiveness?" Marcus looked at David. "I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it wasn't serious. It's about choosing to focus on future possibilities instead of past mistakes." "Excellent answer." The Queen turned to address all the teenagers. Young people, what you've witnessed here today is quite remarkable. These two men took a moment of violence and stupidity and transformed it into something that will help hundreds of young people for years to come. She looked back at Marcus and David. Gentlemen, you have my full support for this program. It will receive permanent royal patronage and funding. As the teenagers cheered and the Queen prepared to leave, she pulled Marcus aside for a private word. Mr. Thompson, she said quietly, I want you to know that I've been following your progress closely through reports from Sergeant Williams and Lord Harrison. Marcus felt honored and nervous. Your Majesty, I hope my efforts have been satisfactory. More than satisfactory. You've demonstrated something that many adults never learn, that our worst moments can become the foundation for our greatest contributions. She paused, looking thoughtful. But I want to give you a warning as well. A warning, Your Majesty. Success and praise can be just as dangerous as failure and criticism. Don't let the recognition you're receiving now make you forget the humility you learned that night 8 months ago. Marcus nodded seriously. Sergeant Williams gave me the same warning, Your Majesty. I try to remember how it felt to realize I had hurt someone for no good reason. Good. Hold on to that feeling, but don't let it paralyze you. Use it as motivation to keep growing and helping others. After the Queen departed, Marcus and David spent time talking individually with the teenagers. Many of them shared stories about their own struggles with anger, violence, and feeling powerless in difficult situations. Ashley approached Marcus as the session was ending. Mr. Thompson, do you think people like me can really change? I mean, I've done some pretty bad things too. Marcus knelt down to her eye level. Ashley, 8 months ago, I was a grown man who attacked a royal guard because I was feeling insecure. If someone like me can change, anyone can change. But it takes work, and it takes people who believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself. Tyler came over as well. Sergeant Williams, why didn't you just beat up Mr. Thompson when he kicked you? My dad says that's what real men do. David considered his answer carefully. Tyler, anyone can hurt someone when they're angry. It doesn't take any special skill or courage. But choosing to help someone learn from their mistakes, especially when they've hurt you, that takes real strength. So you're saying my dad is wrong? I'm saying there are different ways to be strong. And the best way is usually the one that helps solve problems instead of creating more problems. As the teenagers left, many of them signed up for the regular weekly sessions. Marcus felt a sense of fulfillment that was completely different from any victory he had experienced in martial arts competitions. David, Marcus said as they cleaned up the equipment, I need to ask you something I've been wondering about for months. Do you ever regret not fighting back that night? Part of me thinks I would have learned my lesson just as well if you had knocked me out. David smiled. Marcus, if I had fought you, what would these 50 kids have learned today? Marcus thought. About it, they would have learned that violence is the best response to violence. But instead, they learned that the strongest people are the ones who can break cycles of violence and turn enemies into allies. Marcus looked around the courtyard where his life had changed so dramatically. I destroyed my reputation and nearly ruined my career in this exact spot 8 months ago. Now I'm standing here with royal support for a program that could help thousands of young people. How is that possible? It's possible because you chose to learn from your mistake instead of making excuses for it, and because you were willing to do the hard work of changing yourself, not just your behavior. David put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. But Marcus, the most important thing you've learned isn't about martial arts or conflict resolution. About the power of second chances and the responsibility that comes with them. Marcus nodded, understanding completely. Every kid we help is a chance to prove that your faith in me was justified. And every kid you help will remember that someone believed in them when they made mistakes. That's how positive change spreads. One person at a time, one choice at a time. As they walked together toward the palace exit, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him from arrogant aggressor to humble teacher. The kick that was meant to demonstrate his superiority had instead revealed his insecurity. But David's unexpected response had opened a door to growth that Marcus never could have imagined. The program would go on to help hundreds of at-risk youth over the following years. Many of them would credit Marcus and David with teaching them that strength comes from service, that real power comes from self-control, that even the worst mistakes can become opportunities for positive change. But perhaps the most important lesson was the one they demonstrated. Every day they worked together, that forgiveness and redemption are not just possible, but can transform both the forgiver and the forgiven in ways that create ripples of positive change far beyond what anyone could predict. The black belt who had kicked a royal guard had learned that the most powerful technique of all was choosing compassion over retaliation, and both men had become stronger because of it.